The views, information, and opinions expressed during the following program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent the views of Access Communications, its representatives, or its employees.
The RCMP Heritage Centre is a not-for-profit charitable organisation mandated to share the story of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. This is one of those stories, part of your heritage.
Well, I'm a retired civil engineer, and I retired in 1998. And a friend of mine was at that time the manager of the Scarlet and Gold gift shop. And so I joined the Friends, and he said, would I like to come and work in the gift shop? And I said, sure, sign me up. But in the meantime, the reenactment of the March West was coming along, and so I got involved in that. And it was just like a construction project. There was the planning and the design and the execution, and then the wrap-up, all the bookwork that's involved after. So that represented about 2 years. And so I worked out of an office, and we did all the registrations for people who wanted to sign up to be part of the reenactment of the March West. And then I was also out in the field, and I served as quartermaster. So people who wanted to have the uniform of the Northwest Mounted Police, we issued those. We also had a gift shop and a trailer that we towed along from camp to camp. And so anyhow, it was just a very enjoyable experience. I got to see a lot of the forts. They started at Fort Dufferin, and then they came through to into Saskatchewan, and over at Roche-Percé and at Avonlea, and then different places along the way. Gravelburg, that's where the cripple camp was, and then ended up the Saskatchewan portion at Fort Walsh, and then some then rode on and ended up at Fort Whoop-Up at Fort McLeod. And so anyhow, that was the southern route. And then there was also a northern route. They didn't go the full distance right from Fort Dufferin to Fort McLeod, but the northern route involved a piece at Fort Pelly, and that was about a 3 to 4 day ride. And then they skipped over to Beardy's Okemasis, and went from there, from Duck Lake, through to Onion Lake, and then some went on to Fort Saskatchewan just out of Edmonton. So that was the northern route. So anyhow, that's how I basically started my retirement, which after the March West was over, because I was a member of the Friends, they asked if I would like to become the editor of the newsletter. And I said, sure, I'd like to do that. And so I was involved with the newsletter for 10 years. And through that, it went back into a lot of history, not only of the March West, but all of the other many stories of the Northwest Mounted Police and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And so I got to know or learn, it was just like a history lesson, a lot of the background and history of the force. So then that involvement with the Friends led to being asked if I would consider being a member of the RCMP Regina Vets Division. And I said I'd be honored. So I became a member of the Vets, and then that led to being on different committees, such as the AGM committee and reunions that a couple of reunions that they've had at Depot. And different tours. There was the around the AGM in other provinces or territories. There was the White House tour, the White Horse tour, and then there was also a tour in Newfoundland. So I got involved in helping to organize those. And then I've been on the Vets Game Dinner Committee for quite a few years now, and so there's been numerous things that I've been on, and lots of involvement with the vets, and I've got to know the vets. They are a great group. They have all kinds of get-togethers. There's a group that meet on Tuesday mornings for coffee. They meet on Saturday for breakfast. There's even other groups or the same people, some of them meet midweek at have lunch together on a Wednesday, and then there's some that get together on Fridays for a steak dinner, and so there's all sorts of things that one can get involved with, and it's just been great. So because of that, I never did go back to work with finding another career. It was just so much. I was having so much fun with my involvement with the vets and with the Friends. So I've been on the board of directors of the Friends now for quite some time, and to see the movement from the old museum over to the Heritage Center, and the new Heritage Center is just really seeing the expansion of the story of being presented of the force, and its remarkable history. There's some utterly fantastic stories of almost superhuman feats, and I can think of some of the ones of stories from the Arctic or the Yukon, and investigations where there was this persistence to bring someone to justice. And I can think of one case that I read about where there'd been a murder, and an axe was involved, and the police officer that was investigating actually took a piece of the stump that where the certain markings in the axe were on the stump, and that the axe was also, I believe, used in the murder. They were stealing some gold from some people, and just the detail back then of what they had to work with, but pursuing that case to bring the perpetrators to justice was something, and I don't think the attitude has changed in terms of modern day policing. There's you hear of stories that where the people involved just go to the ends of the earth to seek out justice. I can remember the first day the assembly was taking place at Fort Dufferin, and I was down there, and it was a terrible weather day. It was raining, it was windy, the rain was almost going sideways. The wind was blowing so hard, and people were gathering to register. And then that night the skies cleared, but there was a wind out of the north, and it was bitterly cold. And this is mid-May in 1999. And so anyhow, they started out, the riders, and it was cold and it was damp. And so anyhow, they then journeyed from Fort Dufferin over to the Saskatchewan border. And so that's when I got to see the riders again. And their noses, they were all sunburned, but it wasn't sunburn, it was windburn. And their noses were down to about the third peel of skin. And they were, you know, had gone through cold, damp conditions. And that was a damp spring. You could almost paddle a canoe for miles down highway ditches or municipal road ditches. And, but anyhow, they persisted. And, you know, lots of mosquitoes then. And so it made me think, you know, this is what it was like back 125 years ago at that time, when those people were striking out, really not on municipal roads or anything like that, but, you know, not knowing about water or whether they were going to get a decent meal that night before they'd probably just pass out from exhaustion and go to sleep. So, you know, but the reenactment, there was some tough weather conditions, and there was certain places where there was all kinds of rain and it was muddy, and you know, it it just made me think, this is what it was like back 125 years ago. Yes, each night there'd be a sunset ceremony, and it was amazing how many locals would gather for that. And in Saskatchewan, the plan was not to necessarily have the camp right in an urban setting. It was, you know, many of them were out in the rural, but people would come from miles around for the sunset ceremonies. And you know, they were all taken in by, you know, these riders. They would, when they were riding down the roads or going past people sitting in lawn chairs, you know, people would stand and clap, or sometimes they would even sing "O Canada." So it was quite a thing. Well, there was probably several, but I can think of you know, the different places where, especially if the weather was good and the musical ride was going to perform, and one of them was at Avonlea, and the musical ride was there. We were up on a hillside, a beautiful Sunday afternoon, and that was quite a thing to behold. And then over at Fort Walsh, similarly, the weather again was good that day, and one of the things that I got to do was to drive the car with the Lieutenant Governor and his wife down from the airport at Fort Walsh down to Fort Walsh itself. I should have said from the airport at Maple Creek down to Fort Walsh. And so that was quite a thing. And so, you know, many times I would think, never in my wildest dreams when I was working as an engineer would I be doing what I was doing in retirement. And after the March West was over, the reenactment, there was a wind-up function, and I was presented a shabrack by Commissioner Phil Murray. And that was something that I had framed, and it hangs on the wall at home. So I'm very proud of that. Well, the northern route was more relaxed than the south. On the southern route, there was longer distances each day, and of course it was earlier in the year. The weather wasn't as good, and the days, you know, were on the cool side or sometimes wet and rainy, whereas the things were getting warmer when we got onto the north route. And so it was a bit more relaxed. The distances weren't as great to cover. And so that, you know, instead of maybe the riders getting in at 7 o'clock at night, they'd get in at 4 in the afternoon. So there was more time for relaxation and getting together and talking with the riders. And there are a few things that stand out. One was some communities would put on a supper or have a program after and entertainment. And at 𝑇ℎ𝑒, they put on a fantastic spread, and they had buffalo. It was the best buffalo I'd ever eaten, and a program after. But there would be certificates presented to the riders who had ridden on 3 days. And it amazed me that how well some of the people, such as the ride master and the corps sergeant major, would carry on and do the ceremony, but there was also some kibitzing back and forth or humor, and it was just like it was better than any comedy show that you would have remembered from Ed Sullivan or anything like that. It was just, this was off the top of their head, nothing was rehearsed, and it was quite a thing just to see how they would kid each other and so forth. And one of the fellows that rode wasn't that tall a person, and so I guess he was, he'd go up to a wagon and get on the wagon and then pull the horse up beside him and get on. So they were giving him a hard time about this, and so they were quizzing him how to properly mount a horse. And so he finally came, he just off this, just without blinking an eye said, "We'll get a shorter horse." So there was things like that that were, stick in my mind and were just priceless, the way they would come up with things that, and all the community people would just be in stitches. During the March West, during any sunset ceremonies or functions that went on for the day, at say a mustering point, I wore the uniform of the Northwest Mounted Police, and I had the stripes of a sergeant. And at Fort Carlton, I didn't know it was coming. I was promoted to a inspector. And so I had the pith helmet, but then what they did was there was this spike. It was probably about a 5-inch spike, was then attached to the top of the pith helmet to designate the inspector or the officer status.
And for you?
For me, that was another memorable experience, and something I won't forget. Well, the Friends are not just members of the RCMP or retired members. They're from across the world, from all walks of life. Quite a few have visited the museum or the new Heritage Center and wanted to become a part of the Friends. The Friends support the Heritage Center and the Historical Collections Unit, with everything they can, whether it's financially or through background information on the force. And so there's people from lots of different countries: Australia, Great Britain, many from the United States who are members, and are very proud to be members of the Friends. And there's cases in where they could receive the newsletter electronically, but choose to receive a hard copy because they feel so proud that when the postman walks up the pathway that it has the logo of the Friends on the envelope. So they've said that they are proud to have that delivered as opposed to come electronically, and others wouldn't then get to see it. There's a great sense of community within the force and retired members, and not only the members themselves of the vets, but their wives. And so you're really welcomed into a community. And, you know, you're treated just like being one of them. And there's lots of joking goes on. You know, if we're having breakfast or coffee or whatever, there's lots of stories and lots of joking. But when you can see when things get serious, you know, the job gets done. And I've thought, you know, I can relate to the members. In my job as an engineer, I was out in the field a fair bit during the first part of my career on construction. And in supervising construction, you go by, you know, the law of the contract, and you're always concerned about public safety. And so I could see some parallels with the RCMP, you know, being out in the field, and then having a head office, and thinking about, you know, what goes on in head office, and maybe not the appreciation of feeling the appreciation of what goes on in the field. And then, you know, being in head office, you have that appreciation for what goes on in the field, but you feel that sometimes that message always doesn't get through as to, you know, what the fellows are doing out there. So anyhow, back to the you know, being a member of the vets and the friends. There's just so much closeness, or it's a closely knit family.
This poem is called The Squad of One. It's written by an Alberta poet by the name of Robert J.C. Stead, probably a little over 100 years ago. And he actually lived in the town of High River, where I happen to live right now. And so it's got a little bit of local culture to it. Probably based on fact, but a great story. Sergeant Blue of the Mounted Police was a so-so kind of guy. He lied a bit, and he swore a bit, and he boozed a bit on the sly. But he held the post at Snake Creek Bend in the good old British way, and a grateful country paid him about 60 cents a day. A life in the Northwest Mounted Police breeds an all-round kind of man, one who can finish whatever he starts, no matter how it began. A man who can wrestle a drunken bum or break up a range stampede. Such are the men of the Mounted Police, and such are the men they breed. Now the snow lay deep at the Snake Creek post, and deep to the east and west. The sergeant had finished his 10-league beat and had settled down to rest in the 2x4 that they called a post, where the flag flew overhead. And he took a look at his monthly mail, and this is the note he read. To Sergeant Blue of the Mounted Police at the post at Snake Creek Bend, from the U.S. Sheriff of County Blank, greetings to you, my friend. There's a team of toughs that give us the slip, though they shot up a couple of blokes, and we reckon they's hid in Snake Creek Gulch and posing as farmer folks. Of all the toughs I ever saw, I reckon these the worst, so shoot to kill if you shoot at all, and be sure you do it first. And send out your strongest squad of men and bring 'em in if you can, for dead or alive. We want 'em here. Yours truly, Jack McMahon. The Sergeant Blue sat back and smiled, for his heart was glad and free, and he said, if I round these beggars up, it's another stripe for me, and promotion don't come easy to one of us Mountie chaps, so I'll scout around tomorrow and bring 'em in perhaps. Next morning, Sergeant Blue, arrayed in farmer smock and jeans and a cutter sleigh he had made himself, set out for the evergreens that grow by the bank of Snake Creek Gulch, by a homestead shack he knew, and a smoke curled up from the chimney pipe to welcome Sergeant Blue. "Aha," says Blue, "and who are you?" "Behold, the chimney smokes, but the fellow that owns this homestead shack is up at Okotoks. And he wasn't expecting callers, for he left his key with me. So we'll just stop in for an interview, and we'll see what we shall see." So he drove his sleigh to the cabin door, and he hollered aloud, "G'day!" And a couple of men with fighting irons came out beside the sleigh. The sergeant said, "I'm a stranger here, and I've driven a weary mile, and if you don't mind, I'll just sit down by the stove in the shack a while." So the sergeant sat and smoked and talked of the home he had left back east, of the snow and the cold and the price of land and the life for man and beast. And suddenly he broke it off with, "Neighbor, will you take a nip? There's a horn of the best you'll find out there in my jumper in the grip." So one of the two went out for it. And as soon as he closed the door, the sergeant tickled the other one's ribs with the nose of his .44. "Now, fella," he said, "you're a man of sense, and you know when you're on the rocks. And a noise as loud as a mouse from you, and they'll take you home in a box." So he fastened the bracelets to his wrist and his legs with a halter shank, and he took his knife and he took his gun, and he made him as safe as the bank. And then he mustered up number 2 in an Indian file parade, and he gave some brief directions, and number 2 obeyed. He coupled them each to each and sat them down on the bed. "It's a frosty day, and we'd better eat before we go," he said. So he fried some pork, and he warmed some beans, and he set out the best that he saw, and he noted the price for the man of the house according to British law. That night at the post sat Sergeant Blue with paper and pen in hand, and this is the note he wrote and signed and mailed to a foreign land. "To the U.S. Sheriff of County Blank, greetings I send to you. My squad has just brought in your men," and the squad was Sergeant Blue.